In the vast isolation of deep space, the distress signal sliced through the silence. It was weak but unmistakable, frantic, desperate, a cry from a dying system. The transmission bounced across the galaxy's communication channels, triggering alarms in countless systems. Yet no one moved. The members of the Galactic Concord remained still, their leaders weighed down by deliberation, calculations, contingencies, but no action. Across the sectors, species capable of intervening hesitated, each calculating risk, reviewing their obligations. A familiar dance of inaction as civilizations wavered in the face of uncertainty. Only one race had always been different: humanity. Known for their impulsive nature, for their passion and action, humanity didn't wait. They leapt into the unknown. And so, despite the warnings, despite the Council's endless deliberations, they would answer. Captain Soren Valtrek stood at the helm of the Stellar Resolve, the bridge illuminated only by the cold blue glow of laser plasma displays. His gaze was fixed on the dark stretch of space beyond the viewport. The silence felt suffocating, yet there was fire in his eyes. The Galactic Concord had spent days discussing the threat level, weighing unknown risks against protocol. But Valtrek's mind was already made up. "Captain." Commander Elias Torin's voice broke through his thoughts, steady and controlled. Torin had been with him through countless missions, the calm to Valtrek's storm. Even now, standing at attention with his hands clasped behind his back, there was no hiding the urgency in his tone. "All systems are ready. The crew is assembled. We can proceed whenever you give the word." Valtrek didn't need to look at his second-in-command to know the weight of this decision. The tension in Torin's posture was enough. The entire crew was aware of what this meant: defying the Concord, defying caution, defying hesitation. Humanity's reputation, for all its flaws, was defined by their willingness to act when others would not. "Sector Thalios 4, Valtrek's voice was hard, his words cutting through the stillness of the bridge. "We've traced the signal's origin. The Concord wants to wait and analyze. We don't have time for that." Torin's mouth tightened in a brief flicker of agreement. "I know, sir. They'll call it reckless, you know that." "Let them," Valtrek said, his hands tightening into fists at his sides. "Lives are at stake. We're not here to debate. We're here to act." Lieutenant Mira Kyle, the Stellar Resolve's comms officer, turned her head from the console, her eyes reflecting the same resolve. "Captain, the Concord hasn't responded. Should we expect—" "We're not waiting for them," Valtrek interrupted sharply. "Plot the jump, Mira." Now, Mira's fingers flew over her controls, her mind already aligned with his. She nodded, her youthful face steeled with determination. The crew wasn't worried. The hesitation they felt wasn't one of fear, but one of certainty. Humanity was different. They moved, even when the galaxy stood frozen. Dr. Lisa Vren, the ship's astrobiologist, stepped forward, her tone softer, but no less intense. "I've analyzed the signal. It's ancient, so much older than anything we've encountered. It's been silent for centuries. Whatever's out there, it's not just in trouble. It's desperate." Soren's jaw tightened. "And we're the only ones who will answer it." Mira glanced back, her hands hovering above the console as the ship's engines powered up, preparing for the jump. "Captain, the Concord's transmission delay suggests they're reluctant to support us. What happens if they—" Soren interrupted, voice unyielding. "Then they'll have to explain why they waited. Plot the jump, Lieutenant." He could already feel the pulse of the ship beneath his boots as the FTL engines roared to life. This wasn't just a mission anymore, it was a defiance. Humanity was the spark the galaxy needed, and Soren would be the one to light it. Seconds passed, but they felt like hours. The Stellar Resolve was ready. His crew was ready. The Concord was still mired in its bureaucratic web, frozen by fear of the unknown. but the ship's crew would be the ones to face that fear head-on. "Jump in 5," Mira called from the comms station, her eyes never leaving the control panel. She worked with practiced efficiency, fingers tapping against the interface, adjusting the coordinates with expert ease. Soren nodded, his mind already racing through the possible outcomes. "Engage!" His command was sharp, cutting through the tension. The ship surged forward. The stars outside the viewport streaked, blurred by the FTL jump as they left the Concord's hesitation behind. The stellar resolve emerged from the jump into the Erendor Cluster, and the scene before them was far from welcoming. The once vibrant star systems were now choked by shadows, strangely shaped metallic constructs, consuming what was left of the light from the fading stars. Vast machines, silent and unmoving, stood like ancient sentinels guarding a secret that no one could quite comprehend. "Sentinels," Dr. Vren murmured under her breath, her eyes wide with a mix of awe and fear. "The forgotten Sentinels. I've read about them. Fragments of ancient texts. They were supposed to be protectors, guardians." "They don't look like protectors now," Soren replied, his tone darkening as he observed the machines that loomed over the dying star. The creatures were draining the very life from it, an endless cycle of consumption. Commander Torin stepped closer, scanning the data displayed on the ship's heads-up display. "They've detected us. They're adapting to our presence. If they're hostile, we're already in their sights." "Then we don't give them a reason to shoot first," Soren said. His voice was firm. "Open a channel, Lieutenant. Let's try talking." Mira's fingers danced over the console, sending a signal out toward the Sentinels, a beacon of peace rather than aggression. The response came quickly, a rumble, a resonance that vibrated through the ship. The voice that followed was cold, metallic, like the grinding of rusted gears. "You trespass on sacred ground," it intoned. "We preserve what was lost. Leave or be consumed." Soren's eyes never wavered. "This is Captain Soren Valtrek of the Stellar Resolve. We're here to help, not harm. What is it that you are preserving?" For a moment, there was nothing, silence that weighed heavily against the crew. Then the voice returned, deeper this time, almost reluctant. "The directive. The stars must endure. We fuel the mission." Dr. Vren's eyes widened in realization. "They're not attacking because they're hostile. They're doing it because they've forgotten their purpose. They're following orders." Soren nodded slowly, understanding beginning to click into place. "Then we need to remind them of their purpose. These Sentinels, they are not the enemy, but their mission is—" "Then we'll help them remember," Elias added, his voice steady. "We'll reach them one way or another." Soren turned to his crew, a quiet resolve settling over him. "Prepare for the next step. We're not backing down." His eyes flicked over their faces, each of them reflecting the same fierce determination. Humanity had always been unpredictable, but now, with everything on the line, they would prove that their anger, their courage, their refusal to stand still in the face of danger, that was their strength. And the galaxy would learn, once again, just what it meant to confront the unknown head-on. The stellar resolve drifted deeper into the Erendor Cluster, each pulse of the ship's engines reverberating through the hull, steady and sure. Soren stood at the helm, eyes fixed on the laser plasma displays, each sweep revealing more of the ominous structures that filled the cluster. The Sentinels, ancient machines that had once protected, now consumed. And yet, in their cold, relentless purpose, there was a trace of something else. A faded memory. A forgotten directive that Soren was determined to uncover. "Captain." Commander Elias Torin's voice broke through the silence, his tone as level as ever. He stood just to Soren's right, scanning the data that flashed across the heads-up display. Their movements are more erratic than before. It looks like they're reacting to our presence. Could be testing us. Soren's gaze narrowed, his jaw tight. They're adaptive, but that means they're not as mindless as they appear. We need to reach them before they start considering us a threat. Dr. Lysa Vren, the ship's astrobiologist, approached from the rear of the bridge. "I've been going over their patterns," she said, her voice tinged with urgency. "This isn't just random destruction. They're draining the star to fuel something, some ancient directive. It's like they're stuck in a loop." "Then we need to break the loop," Soren replied, his voice cutting through the weight of the moment. "We can't afford to sit back and wait for their next move." He turned toward Lieutenant Mira Kale, the communications officer, who was already busy at her console, fingers moving rapidly over the controls. "Open a direct line to them. I want to see if we can get them to engage, really engage, on a level we can understand." Mira hesitated, glancing up from her screen. "Sir, the initial signal was a warning. They've threatened to consume us. There's no indication they'll open up." Soren's eyes darkened, his hands gripping the edge of the command chair. "We're not going to be consumed. We'll make them see reason." A low sound reverberated through the ship's hull as Mira adjusted the frequency of the transmission. The laser plasma displays flickered momentarily before she sent the peace signal again, laced with human resolve. The ship's comm system pulsed with energy, a beacon cutting through the tense silence. The response came almost immediately, the eerie hum of the Sentinels' communication resonating through the ship. It vibrated, deep and unsettling, like the groan of something long forgotten trying to remember its purpose. "You trespass?" The voice boomed again, sharp and dispassionate. "We preserve. The directive endures. Leave now, or be consumed." Soren's pulse quickened, but he held his ground. "We're not leaving," he said, his voice calm yet full of intent. "We've come to help. You don't need to consume the stars. You can stop." There was a long pause, a deep, unsettling silence that stretched across the bridge. Soren felt every second of it, the weight of the unknown pressing down. He knew this was a critical moment, a turning point. Then the response came. The hum shifted, distorted, as if the machine's ancient mind was struggling with the words. "The directive," it echoed. "The stars must endure. The mission is all." "Who gave you the mission?" Soren asked, his words sharp like a spark in dry grass. "Who are you protecting? What are you preserving?" The silence returned, heavy and oppressive, as if the Sentinels were sifting through centuries of lost purpose. Then came the voice, quieter now, almost hesitant. "Protection must continue. The mission has no end. We are guardians of the lost." Dr. Vren stepped forward, eyes wide with understanding. "The Sentinels were built to protect, but they've become prisoners of their own directive. They're consuming stars because they've forgotten what they were meant to do. They think they're preserving something, but it's all a twisted interpretation of their mission." Soren nodded slowly, processing the revelation. "So we're not dealing with machines driven by malice. They're driven by a lost purpose. If we can help them remember—" Commander Toren interrupted, his voice low and tactical. "If we do that, they might stop the destruction. But we have to be careful. We can't let them think we're enemies. They're powerful, and they won't hesitate if they see us as a threat." Soren turned to Mira. "Open another channel, but this time, make it personal. Let them hear humanity's voice. Let them understand that we're offering a way out, not a fight." Mira looked uncertain, but nodded. Her fingers danced across the controls once again. The pulse of energy surged as the transmission went live. "Sentinels." Soren's voice was steady, but there was an underlying force to it, a weight of conviction that only humanity could carry. We understand you were created for a purpose. We're not here to take that from you. We're here to help you fulfill it, without destroying everything in your path. You don't have to consume the stars. You can protect them, but in a way that doesn't cost everything else. The hum on the other end shifted once again. For a moment, Soren thought he could hear something almost like confusion, a flicker of recognition, buried deep beneath layers of function. Purpose is lost, the voice rumbled, faint and distorted. The stars must endure. The mission never ends. We know, Soren said, his voice unwavering. But the mission is corrupted. You were meant to protect. Let us help you remember how. The Sentinels' response came slower this time, almost a whisper, the ancient machines trembling with something more than static. Protection. Lost. The directive no longer understood. The connection was still raw, but it was enough. There was a crack in their rigid framework, a tiny opening that hadn't been there before. We can remind you, Soren pressed, his voice carrying the weight of humanity's will. We can help you, but you have to trust us. Elias Torrens stepped up, his face a study of calm determination. We're not here to destroy you. We're offering you a chance to fulfill your true purpose. You were made to protect. You can still protect. But you need to stop consuming, stop destroying. A long pause followed. Then the Sentinels' response echoed through the ship, their once imposing tone softened. Protection, the mission, can be renewed. Soren allowed himself a breath, a flicker of hope stirring in his chest. We can help you, he said again, softer this time. Together we can restore balance. The connection ended with a low thrum, the screens flickering as the transmission ceased. A quiet tension hung in the air, but it was different now. The Sentinels hadn't rejected them. They hadn't turned away. They had listened. We've made a connection, Doctor. Vren said, her voice trembling with disbelief. They're willing to reconsider. They're not our enemies, not in the way we thought. Torin gave a sharp nod. His eyes narrowed in thought. But we have to move fast. If they're still adapting to us, we don't know how long we have before they turn hostile again. Soren's gaze swept across his crew. They had taken the first step. They had reached out, not with weapons, but with understanding. Now they had to guide the Sentinels to the next phase. The path forward wouldn't be easy, but they had made progress. The machines that had once been a destructive force now had a chance at redemption. We'll take it from here, Soren said, his voice steady and resolute. We'll help them find their true purpose. Humanity is here to remind them of what they were always meant to be. Protectors, not destroyers. The stellar resolve moved slowly toward the heart of the cluster, each crew member focused on their task, knowing that what they had just started could change the fate of the galaxy. The stellar resolve held position at the edge of the Eryndor Cluster, the ship now surrounded by the dark silhouettes of the Sentinels. The machines, once imposing and relentless, were still, as if waiting for something. Their vast skeletal forms, once a symbol of impenetrable might, now seemed hesitant. But that hesitation was fragile, a crack in the ancient armor, and Soren Valtrek wasn't about to waste it. Captain, Commander Elias Torrens' voice was sharp, pulling Soren from his thoughts. I'm seeing more fluctuations in their energy readings. It's as if they're processing our last transmission. Soren stepped closer to the central command display, the heads-up laser plasma screens flashing with data. On the left, the cluster's once vibrant stars blinked weakly, drained by the massive machines in orbit. On the right, the Sentinels' energy signature pulsed irregularly, their systems coming to life after eons of dormancy. They're awakening, Soren murmured. Not just physically. Something in their core systems is shifting. They're responding to us. Dr. Lysa Vren stood to the side, her eyes scanning the readings. It's not just a technical reboot. There's a cognitive component to this. The energy signature is no longer uniform. There's complexity. The way they're processing the data, they're trying to make sense of us. Soren turned to face her, his eyes narrowing. They've been operating under a single directive for centuries. Protect, preserve, consume. If they're starting to process beyond that, we might actually be able to help them see reason. But we have to act fast. The silence that followed was thick with anticipation. The Stellar Resolve's crew, aware of the high stakes, moved with urgency but precision. They'd done what no one else in the galaxy dared. Made contact with an ancient force, and for the first time, it seemed the Sentinels were listening. "Lieutenant Mira," Soren called, his voice calm but demanding. "Get me a direct line to the Sentinels. This is our chance to make them understand. We need to know why they were built. What exactly are they protecting?" Mira's fingers danced across the plasma display as she adjusted the transmission frequency. Her face remained focused, eyes locked on the fluctuating data. "I'm opening a secure channel now, Captain. If they respond this time, it won't be just a warning. They'll engage." Soren's heart quickened. The Sentinels had been programmed for protection, yes, but for what purpose? And why had they veered so far off course? The answer to that could be the key to saving the dying star systems in the cluster. The question now wasn't whether they could stop the destruction. It was how to reawaken the Sentinels' lost purpose without provoking an attack. The console's display flickered to life, the cold, metallic hum of the Sentinels' communication resonating through the bridge again, but this time it was different. The sound was slower, deliberate, as if it were no longer just a machine responding, but something searching for meaning. "Why do you consume?" Soren's voice rang out, direct and challenging. "You say you protect, but you're draining the life from these stars. That isn't protection." The response came, not as a warning this time, but a quiet, almost inquisitive rumble. "Consumption. Preserves," the voice spoke. The tone was muted, devoid of anger, yet the words felt lost, disconnected, as if the machine itself no longer fully understood its mission. "No," Soren said, taking a deep breath. "You were made to protect. You were guardians, not destroyers. What are you really trying to preserve?" A pause. The space between the Stellar Resolve and the Sentinels felt stretched, fragile, but not hopeless. The air in the bridge grew heavier, as if the ship itself was holding its breath. "Preserve the lost. The mission," the voice answered, its tone now carrying a strange sense of sorrow, or perhaps confusion. It was a deviation from its previous rigidity, a sign that perhaps they could be reached after all. Dr. Vren spoke up, her voice laced with insight. "They're not acting out of malice, Captain. They've been following a directive for so long that it's twisted their understanding. What they call preservation isn't life. It's the continuation of a mission. They've forgotten what they were meant to protect." Soren turned toward her, his mind racing through the implications. "So they're not the enemy. They're victims of their own purpose. We can work with this." Commander Torin raised an eyebrow, his skepticism evident. "Are we sure about that? They've been draining stars for centuries. We've seen the destruction they've caused. What if they can't change?" "We don't have a choice," Soren replied, his voice firm. "This isn't just about saving the stars. It's about saving the Sentinels from themselves." "Captain," Mira spoke again, her voice tight with concern. "I'm detecting a shift in their energy output. It's fluctuating, erratically. They're responding, but it's like they're conflicted." Soren felt the weight of the moment settle over him. The Sentinels were standing at a precipice, ready to either continue their mindless mission of destruction or rediscover their original directive. The outcome hinged on what they did next. "Open the channel again," Soren ordered. "We need to show them there's another way. A way to protect without consuming." Mira nodded, her hands moving swiftly over the controls. The laser plasma screens flared briefly, the ship's systems vibrating with the power of the new transmission. "Sentinels," Soren's voice was resolute. "You are guardians. You were built to protect, not to drain life. We're offering you a chance to fulfill your mission again. Without destruction. We can help you. Let us show you the way." For a long moment, there was no response. Then the voice returned, slower, as though it were turning over the words in its ancient memory banks, seeking something it had long forgotten. Protection must evolve. The mission must change. Soren felt the weight of the words settle in his chest. This was the breakthrough they'd been waiting for. The Sentinels had acknowledged it. They were starting to remember what they were meant to do. "Good," Soren said quietly, his eyes meeting Torin's, then Dr. Vren's. "Now we guide them. We need to help them find their true purpose." But Torin's expression was still tense. "What's next, Captain? They've admitted they're lost, but that doesn't mean they'll let us help them. If they're still holding on to the old mission—" "We show them something new," Soren interrupted. His voice was unwavering, his resolve as solid as the ship beneath their feet. "We give them a new directive, one they can follow without destruction." The stellar resolve began to shift its position, inching closer to the Sentinels. It was a calculated risk. There was still uncertainty in their response. But this was humanity's strength. They would act when others hesitated. "I'm sending a signal through the ship's resonance core," Dr. Vren said, approaching the engineering station. "We'll amplify our message through the ship's systems, show them what it means to protect, let them feel the connection between us, the life we protect." Soren nodded. "Do it, and make it clear. This isn't just about saving lives. It's about giving them a choice." As the crew worked in tandem, the ship hummed with energy. The resonance core activated, sending a wave of powerful signals toward the Sentinels, each one carefully designed to stir something deep within them. The air in the bridge thickened with anticipation. They had reached the tipping point. If the Sentinels accepted this new vision of their mission, they could begin to restore balance to the cluster. If they rejected it, well, Soren wasn't going to think about that just yet. The laser plasma display flickered again, the Sentinels' response slowly taking form. "We remember," the voice rumbled. "Guardians, once, protectors, of life." Soren exhaled, his shoulders relaxing ever so slightly. The change had begun. The Sentinels were no longer just destroyers. They were remembering what they had once been. And with humanity's guidance, they could find their way back to it. The stellar resolve hung in the Eryndor Cluster, its crew tense with the weight of what had just transpired. The Sentinels, once implacable harbingers of destruction, were now responding to their message. But as their energy readings fluctuated across the heads-up displays, Soren knew this moment of potential transformation was fragile. They had reached the Sentinels, yes, but the real work had only just begun. The laser plasma displays flickered with a soft glow, showing an ancient network of interconnected systems within the Sentinels' massive frames. The energy signatures were no longer uniform. There were flashes of warmth, of life that had been dormant for centuries. "Captain," Mira's voice broke through the stillness, calm yet urgent. She was studying the readouts closely. "They're responding to the resonance signal, but it's like they're recalibrating, processing what we've shown them." Soren moved toward her station, his eyes narrowing as he studied the data. The Sentinels weren't attacking, but they weren't fully yielding either. It was as though they were caught between the old mission and something new, something they were struggling to comprehend. "I don't think they know what to do with this yet," Soren murmured, running his hand through his dark hair. "They've been locked in this cycle for millennia. We need to give them more. We need to remind them of what they were built for." Commander Elias Torin, standing at the bridge's edge, spoke with quiet authority. "They're adapting faster than we thought. The energy fluctuations are stabilizing, but it's still unclear whether they'll act on it. We don't know what kind of impact this might have." Soren's gaze didn't waver. We're about to find out. They're still more machine than sentient. But we've cracked their programming. They're searching for something. The question is, can they recognize it? I believe they can, Dr. Lysa Vren said from her position near the display, her voice measured but filled with conviction. They've already begun to shift. The initial signs indicate they're aware of their purpose being misaligned. But purpose is a powerful force. If they can't reconcile it, we'll lose them again. Soren turned to face her. Then we can't stop. We have to help them finish this. The laser plasma displays flared briefly, and Mira's fingers danced across the controls. The screen lit up with a schematic of the Sentinels, their hulking forms stretching across multiple star systems. What had once been a force of pure destruction was now slowly taking on a new dimension, something closer to awareness. It's happening, Mira said, her voice low, almost incredulous. The primary Sentinel units are linking their systems together. They're syncing. They're recalibrating their directive. Soren felt the tension in his chest ease, but only slightly. The Sentinels were finally recognizing what they had been, what they had lost. But the road ahead was still uncertain. Their purpose could easily slip back into the destructive cycle they had known for so long. Captain, Commander Toren said, his tone sharp, they've just sent a pulse through the system, a kind of signal, but it's spreading. I'm not sure how far it's going. Soren's eyes snapped to the readouts. The pulse wasn't an attack. This was something different, something more deliberate. They had touched something inside the Sentinels, and now the machines were reaching out to something beyond themselves. Shut down all external transmissions, Soren ordered. If this signal goes beyond the cluster, we may have to deal with a larger problem, Toren finished. Understood. Cutting all external channels. The crew worked swiftly, fingers flying over consoles and heads-up displays, severing the connection before it could spread. But Soren couldn't shake the feeling that this was only a temporary measure. If the Sentinels were reaching out, who, or what, were they trying to contact? Soren turned to Dr. Vren. Any idea what this pulse might mean? She stared at the screen, her brow furrowed. It's too early to tell, but if they're truly reconnecting with their purpose, it could be a signal to something or someone from their past, something they once protected, something they might have forgotten. Or it could be a beacon, Soren mused. His eyes darted to the displays again. We can't let that signal go unanswered. I'll increase our signal dampening, Mira said, already tapping into the controls. But there's a limit to what we can do if it's a distress signal or a call for reinforcements. Soren was about to respond when the display flickered again, showing a massive distortion in the cluster. The energy readings shifted, spiking in intensity. The Sentinels were no longer just recalibrating. They were pulling power from the very stars they had been draining. It's feeding, Toren said, his voice grim. It's amplifying the signal. Not just amplifying, Soren said, his eyes widening as he processed the data. It's calling something. They've remembered their mission, and they're trying to fulfill it. We've triggered something in them. They're not just reconnecting, they're preparing to complete their task. Dr. Vren's voice was steady but filled with urgency. This is what I feared. If they believe they've completed their directive, they'll act accordingly. And if that means eliminating threats, they won't hesitate. Soren clenched his fists. We've come too far to let them slip back into destruction. We need to stop that pulse from reaching anyone else. Commander Toren moved quickly to a separate console, accessing the ship's internal systems. If we disrupt their internal communications, we might be able to halt the pulse's spread. But we'll need to get close. Too close for comfort. Soren nodded. Do it. We can't afford to wait. As Toren worked, the rest of the crew stood by, waiting for the signal to go. Each one knew what was at stake. The Sentinels had only just begun to awaken, and now they were teetering on the edge of a precipice. If they misstep, if the machines remembered their destructive nature, it could spell the end for everyone in the cluster. "Captain," Mira said, looking up from her station, "I've located the epicenter of the pulse. It's coming from the largest Sentinel unit near the central star. We're going to need to engage it directly to stop this." Soren glanced at Torin, who gave a quick nod. "We can disrupt their signal long enough to disable their systems, but it's risky. If we fail, we'll be exposed." "No room for failure," Soren said. His voice was firm, resolute. "We're not going to let them fall back into the cycle. We'll finish this now." The Stellar Resolve moved forward, its engines pushing the ship closer to the heart of the cluster. The stars around them flickered, dimmed by the shadow of the Sentinels. For a moment, it felt as if time itself had slowed, the weight of the mission pressing in on them. Then, with a final surge of power, the ship broke through the remaining distance. They were at the epicenter. The Sentinels loomed before them, immense and silent, their energy fluctuating wildly. Soren's grip tightened on the command chair. "Let's finish this." The crew worked in unison, ready to push forward into the unknown. They had given the Sentinels a chance at redemption, and now it was time to ensure they didn't lose it. The Stellar Resolve moved deeper into the heart of the Erendor Cluster. Soren's eyes were locked on the laser plasma displays, each one flickering with data as the crew worked together to analyze the growing instability in the Sentinel systems. The massive forms of the machines loomed in front of them, their energy signatures now pulsing erratically. What had once been a potential for hope was quickly devolving into chaos. "We're in position!" Commander Elias Torin's voice cut through the tension, his fingers flying over the console. "Disrupting their systems now." Soren watched as the ship's systems shifted with a calculated hum. They had made it this far. The Sentinels were recalibrating, yes, but something was off. Their systems were no longer fully under their own control. It was as if the ancient machines were fighting themselves, wrestling between their old purpose of destruction and the memory of what they had once been. "Captain," Mira's voice snapped his focus back to the display. "Their signal is still amplifying. The central unit is channeling all its energy to this pulse. Whatever it is, it's trying to reach something beyond this cluster. Something that might reinforce their old directive." A sharp chill ran through Soren. "They're trying to finish what they started." Dr. Lisa Vran moved closer, eyes scanning the fluctuations in the data. "If they succeed, the damage could be catastrophic. They've been consuming stars for centuries to fuel this mission. Whatever reinforcements they're summoning will have the same destructive intent." "We can't let that happen," Soren said, his jaw tight. He wasn't just speaking to the crew, he was speaking to the machines, the lost protectors. They had to see that their mission wasn't just to consume, to protect, yes, but to protect life, not obliterate it. "Mira," Soren commanded, turning sharply toward her. "Break through their signal again. Get me a direct line." Mira's fingers hesitated for a fraction of a second before she leaned into her station, focusing on the pulse emanating from the central unit. The ship's systems glowed brighter, intensifying as Mira's voice broke through the tension. "Attempting to override now, Captain." For a brief moment, the Stellar Resolve vibrated, the tension growing. Then, the laser plasma display flickered and stabilized, and the familiar voice of the Sentinel rumbled through the ship's speakers once again. But this time, it sounded different, slower, as if it were weighing its words carefully. "You persist." The voice was weary, as if it were no longer certain of itself. "You interfere with the mission." "We're not here to stop your mission, Sentinel," Soren replied, his voice steady, unwavering. "We're here to help you remember why you exist, to help you see the truth of your purpose." Another long pause stretched between them, each second thick with uncertainty. The pulse on the display was still fluctuating, but it was slower now, weaker. The machine's internal systems seemed to be misfiring, as though they were in a state of flux. "Purpose," the voice finally responded. "I remember, but I do not understand. I was tasked to preserve, to save the last, but I have failed." Soren's grip tightened on the console. "You haven't failed. You were designed to protect, not destroy. The lives you were meant to protect are still here, still waiting for you." The pulse on the display dimmed further. The enormous forms of the Sentinels, ancient and monolithic, shifted slightly. Their energy was no longer building toward a cataclysmic explosion. It was dissipating, gradually. The machines were slowing, but something was missing in their systems. They were still struggling to connect with what they once were. "This isn't about just stopping the signal," Soren said, his voice almost quiet now. "It's about reminding them of their original directive: protect life, not consume it." Dr. Vren spoke up, her voice cutting through the quiet. "We need to push harder. If they can't reconnect to that core directive, they might reset to their default state. They will destroy everything in their path to fulfill that mission." Soren nodded. He was already thinking ahead. "Do it. All systems. Send them everything we know, the lives we protect, the meaning of existence beyond just surviving." As the crew worked, the ship's resonance core powered up again. A new wave of energy surged through the ship's systems, feeding directly into the Sentinels' signals. The crew wasn't just speaking to the machines anymore. They were showing them the very essence of humanity, the ability to fight for life, not simply to preserve it out of cold calculation. Mira adjusted the settings, her voice soft but filled with urgency. "Sending the message now, Captain. It's different from before. They're receiving it." The room fell into a hush as the resonance sent the signal, an explosion of thought and feeling sent directly to the Sentinels. Their cold, calculating systems would try to block it, try to protect themselves from this new, chaotic input. But this time, the Sentinels weren't just responding to commands. They were responding to empathy. The central unit, the largest and most ancient of the Sentinels, flared with a new energy. The pulse began to distort again, but this time, it wasn't a signal for more destruction. It was a signal of awakening. "I remember," the Sentinel's voice came through, almost strained. "I remember protecting the living, not consuming. But the directive," the voice wavered again, as if it were grasping for something just out of reach. "The directive is corrupted." "No," Soren said, his voice firm. "The directive was always to protect. The galaxy isn't just about surviving, it's about growth, about connection." A long silence filled the bridge. The crew could feel it. The Sentinels were struggling, but they were beginning to remember. Something had clicked within their systems. Then, a breakthrough. "We failed," the voice said, quieter now. "We were never meant to destroy. We were guardians." The massive machines shifted once more. Their energy signatures, once chaotic and erratic, began to stabilize. The pulse faded, and for the first time in what seemed like ages, the Sentinels stopped consuming. They weren't feeding anymore. They were standing still, as if taking a moment to reassess. Soren felt a weight lift from his chest. This was it. They had succeeded. The Sentinels weren't just listening, they were understanding. "They've stabilized," Mira confirmed, her voice breaking the silence. "They're no longer draining the star. The pulse is gone." A quiet sigh swept through the bridge. Soren stood tall, watching the massive Sentinels, their once destructive energy now muted, now at peace. The galaxy had been saved, not through force, but through understanding, through a connection that had touched even the most ancient of machines. But the silence wasn't over yet. The Sentinels still hadn't spoken again, and there was still uncertainty hanging in the air. Then the voice returned. "We were not meant to consume," it said, its tone softened, almost wistful. We were meant to protect, and we have failed. Soren stepped forward. Number, you've remembered. And now, you have a new purpose. Help us protect those who need it. Help us rebuild what you once guarded. The Sentinel's energy shimmered, then solidified. We will, it responded, the sound of its voice now tinged with a sense of acceptance. Soren nodded. They had reached the Sentinels, and in doing so, had awakened a force that could now help restore what had been lost. They weren't just destroyers anymore. They were protectors. And as the machines began to disperse, no longer a threat, but an ally, Soren realized that they had accomplished the impossible. He turned to his crew, his voice steady. We've done it. Now let's make sure it never happens again. The crew stood together, silent but resolute, ready for whatever challenge lay ahead. They had faced the darkness and brought light to it, and in doing so had proven that the greatest strength wasn't in destruction, but in the power to change. The stellar resolve hung in stillness, as if the very air had been sucked out of the ship. The crew had succeeded. Against all odds, they had turned the Sentinels from a galaxy-threatening force into protectors. But as the last remnants of the pulse flickered away, an unspoken tension lingered in the bridge. The mission wasn't complete yet. Not by a long shot. Soren stood at the helm, his eyes fixed on the laser plasma display, which now showed a quieter, more stable system. The Sentinels were no longer draining energy from the stars. Their power had receded into a muted hum, a mere shadow of their former destructive selves. But there was something else, something deeper, that still unsettled Soren. Captain, Mira's voice broke through the stillness, drawing his attention. We're receiving an encrypted transmission from the Galactic Concord. Soren's shoulders tensed. The Concord had been watching. They had been cautious, hesitant. Now, they were reaching out. But for what purpose? Patch it through, he said. The heads-up display flickered as the transmission came through, the holographic face of High Arbiter Clyra looming before them. The alien leader's luminous scales shifted under the light, and her eyes, sharp as daggers, locked onto Soren. Captain Valtrek, Clyra's voice was cold, unwavering. You've done something unexpected. Soren met her gaze, his voice steady. We've done what was necessary. The Sentinels are no longer a threat. They've been reawakened, and they'll help restore what was lost. Clyra's expression remained unreadable. Reawakened, yes, but you've interfered with something ancient, something that wasn't meant to be disturbed. The Concord had its reasons for keeping the Sentinels dormant. You've put us all in danger. Soren's fingers tightened around the command console. He was done waiting for permission. The Sentinels are no longer what they were. They've chosen to protect, not destroy. We gave them a chance to remember their purpose. Clyra's gaze hardened. Your actions may have saved the cluster, Captain, but at what cost? You've stirred a relic of the past. We don't know what else could come from this. You've pushed the boundaries of galactic safety, and you'll be held accountable for this. Accountable? Soren's voice sharpened, his patience slipping. You sat on your hands while the galaxy bled. We acted, and the result speaks for itself. The Sentinels are no longer a weapon. They're an ally. The Arbiter's cold stare flickered for just a moment before she gave a tight nod. For now, the Concord will grant you a provisional reprieve. But understand this, Captain. We will be watching. You have no idea what you've truly unleashed. Proceed with caution. The transmission cut off, leaving a heavy silence behind. Soren exhaled sharply, his gaze flicking to his crew. They had faced so much uncertainty, and now they were being told that their victory had merely delayed a greater storm. Captain, Elias's voice was low, almost hesitant. The Concord is right about one thing. We don't know what else the Sentinels' awakening could mean. What if their reactivation triggers something else? A new threat? Soren turned toward him, his expression hard. I won't sit and wait for the galaxy to collapse while we hide in a corner. We've made a difference. Now we need to see it through. Elias didn't argue. He nodded, but the concern lingered in his eyes. Understood, sir. Soren turned to Mira, who was now tapping furiously on the controls. The display shimmered with new data, signals blinking in and out. Mira? Soren asked, his voice edged with concern. There's something else, she said, her voice tense. Another signal. It's faint, but it's coming from beyond the cluster. The pattern, it's similar to the one the Sentinels were sending out. Soren's stomach clenched. Reinforcements? It's too early to tell, Mira replied. But if it's another Sentinel signal, we need to find out what it is. Soren's jaw set. He had been hoping for peace, for resolution, but it seemed the galaxy's unrest was far from over. Set a course for the source of that signal, Soren ordered. We're going to see this through. If there's another force out there, we need to know what it is, and whether it's friend or foe. The stellar resolve cruised deeper into the unknown, its engines pushing the ship forward at maximum speed. The stars outside the viewport began to blur as they cut through the fabric of space, racing toward the unknown signal that now dominated their radar. Soren stood at the bridge, staring at the heads-up display as Mira's fingers worked quickly, tracking the signal's trajectory. The energy readings had intensified as they closed in on the source. It was coming from a dark nebula, a place that had once been considered off-limits for exploration due to its unstable gravitational forces and unpredictable energy fields. We're approaching the source, Mira announced. The signal's becoming stronger. Soren stood tall, his hands clasped behind his back. Prepare for anything. We don't know what we're walking into. The ship shuddered as they entered the nebula, the thick darkness pressing in from all sides. The stars disappeared, swallowed by the swirling clouds of gas and dust. The laser plasma displays flickered as the sensors struggled to maintain a steady readout. Shields are holding, Mira said, her voice calm but strained. But I'm picking up irregular pulses. They're not like anything we've encountered before. Can you isolate them? Soren asked, moving closer. Attempting, she replied. The readings shifted once again, and the pulse on the display began to form a coherent pattern. It's not a distress signal, it's more like a beacon. A beacon? Soren repeated, his mind racing. What could be sending out a beacon in this place? And why now? I don't know, Mira said, her brow furrowing, but whatever it is, we're about to find out. The stellar resolve cut through the darkness, navigating the treacherous nebula with caution. The pulse grew louder, more insistent, until a bright flash cut through the darkness, sharp, blinding, almost like a flare. The ship lurched as a massive form appeared before them, materializing from the nebula's depths. It was enormous, dwarfing the stellar resolve with its sheer size. The form was vast and jagged, resembling an ancient construct, something both familiar and utterly alien. Soren's heart skipped a beat. What in the stars is that? Mira's voice was breathless. That's no sentinel, it's a ship. Ancient but active, and it's responding to the signal. Not just responding, Doctor, Friend said from behind them. It's waiting. The massive vessel loomed ahead, silent and still. But Soren knew one thing for certain. They weren't the only ones looking for answers, and the path to discovery was only getting more dangerous. Prepare for a rendezvous, Soren said, his voice hardening. If they want to talk, we'll be ready, but I'm not trusting anything until I know what it's after. The crew sprang into action. This mission wasn't just about saving the Sentinels. It was about uncovering a truth that could alter the future of the galaxy forever. And Soren wasn't going to let it slip through their fingers. As they neared the unknown ship, the pulse intensified once more, a signal that was no longer asking for help. It was demanding something, and Soren knew whatever was coming, they weren't going to like it. Full stop, Soren ordered. "Let's see what it has to say." The massive vessel loomed ahead, a silhouette of alien architecture, its contours angular and sharp, cutting through the dense nebula like a relic from another age. The stellar resolve drifted cautiously toward it, the laser plasma displays flickering with bursts of interference as they moved deeper into the unknown. "We've entered its gravity well," Mira reported, her fingers dancing over her console. "We're being pulled in." Soren's jaw tightened. "Cut the engines, let's stop drifting." The crew braced as the ship slowed, coming to a complete halt just beyond the eerie, jagged hull of the mysterious vessel. The ship was unlike anything they had encountered. It wasn't just a ship, it was an artifact, ancient and seemingly abandoned, yet fully functional. Dark energy readings poured from it, more intense than the Sentinels' signal but strangely organized. "I'm not reading any signs of life," Mira said, her voice low. "But the energy signatures, they're active, like something inside is stirring." Soren stood motionless, staring at the screen. The ship's design was unfamiliar, its surface marred by millennia of neglect. Yet there was a strange sense of purpose to it, a dark energy that hummed in a way that spoke of power. The more they analyzed it, the more the question gnawed at him. What had this ship been built to do? Dr. Lisa Vren, usually composed, was unsettled. "This structure is ancient, Soren. It's almost like it was built in a time before any of the known galactic powers. I can't make out the material. It's not something we've cataloged." "This ship wasn't designed for protection," Elias added, his voice colder than usual. "It wasn't made to guard. It's something else. Something we haven't even begun to understand." A soft beep interrupted their exchange. Mira's fingers stopped. Her eyes widened as she glanced at the heads-up display. "Captain, it's initiating a transmission." "On screen," Soren ordered, his mind already racing. The display flickered. Lines of static buzzed before the image of a figure appeared. The being wasn't humanoid, but instead projected a shifting, formless outline, a silhouette that seemed to flicker and distort with every passing second. Its voice, when it came, was distorted too, a strange amalgamation of several tones, making it hard to distinguish its source. "Who are you?" Soren's voice cut through the tension. "Why did you send that signal?" The figure's shifting form seemed to concentrate for a moment of stillness before the distorted voice filled the room. "Not all should be disturbed," it replied, its tone echoing, reverberating through the hull. "We awaken when called. You have trespassed. You have come too close." "We didn't come here to trespass," Soren shot back, his eyes narrowing. "We're here because something is threatening the galaxy. Your machines, the Sentinels, were consuming stars. You sent out a signal. We came to stop it." The figure's form shimmered, flickering as though it were unsure whether to form itself into something recognizable. Then it spoke again, this time more deliberately, more purposeful. "You seek to stop what you do not understand, but you will not comprehend the cost of that knowledge. The Sentinels were born to protect. We did not expect this. The power we seek, it does not belong to you." Soren's chest tightened. "What power?" A long silence passed, the tension between them thickening. It was as if the ship was considering how much to reveal, how much to let them understand. The being's voice came again, softer this time, more intimate. "The technology you have awakened, it cannot be unmade. It is an ancient tool, far beyond your comprehension. We are its architects, and now you are standing in the place of its creators. You cannot erase what we have begun. You cannot stop the flow of time." Soren took a step forward, his eyes fixed on the shifting form. "What happened to you? What caused you to abandon your mission? Why did you let the Sentinels fall into chaos?" The figure was still, its form warping again, as if struggling to maintain its shape. A low, almost sorrowful hum began to fill the ship's speakers. Then the figure spoke once more. We were not meant to abandon them. We were meant to guide them. But we failed. The destruction we caused, it was never our intention. We sought only to preserve. What did you preserve? Soren asked, his voice now steady, more measured. What did you keep if it's led to this? Another long pause, and then the figure spoke again, its words heavy, filled with regret. The answer was lost before we could see it, and now you must choose. Continue the cycle or end it. End it? Soren asked. What do you mean? How? The figure hesitated before it replied, its voice darkening. You stand at the crossroads of a galaxy lost to time. You've awakened forces that should have remained buried. Your Sentinels are the key to an old war, and now it is your choice to either control the path they take or let it burn. Soren's mind raced as the implications of the figure's words hit him. A war. Was this what they had awakened? The Sentinels were just the beginning? This isn't just about the Sentinels, Soren said, his voice lowering. You've awakened something far worse. What are we dealing with here? Who were you before you became this? The figure seemed to collapse in on itself, the energy shifting in a ripple. Then it responded, its voice now tinged with a quiet, almost mournful note. We were the architects of time, the masters of the cycle. We saw all things, its rise, its fall, and its endless return. But we lost ourselves in the same cycle we tried to control. Now, we can only watch. The figure's form seemed to dissolve, as if the very energy that created it was fading. You have reached the end of the path we set in motion. It is no longer just about survival. It is about how you will define it. The transmission cut off, and the heads-up display returned to its previous static. Soren stood in the silence, his heart racing, 1,000 thoughts running through his mind. He turned to his crew, each face a mixture of confusion and realization. We've just been told we're standing on the edge of something ancient, Soren said, his voice low but sharp. And now we have a choice to make. But the war they spoke of, it's not over. It's just beginning. Elias stepped forward, his voice a mix of resolve and caution. So, we've awakened the Sentinels, and now we're being told it's our responsibility to control them or risk everything. Yes, Soren replied. The galaxy isn't just fighting to survive anymore. It's fighting for its future. He stared once more at the dark, hulking vessel in front of them, knowing they had only scratched the surface of what lay ahead. There was a war to come, and it was far bigger than anything they could have imagined. The stellar resolve sat silently in the heart of the nebula, and Soren knew that the fate of the galaxy rested on what they chose to do next. They weren't just stopping a threat anymore, they were standing at the precipice of something much larger. Prepare the ship, Soren ordered. We're going deeper into the unknown. The stellar resolve surged forward, the engines whirring in anticipation as the crew followed Soren's lead. The dark mass of the ancient vessel loomed ahead, and for the first time in his life, Soren felt as if they were on the edge of something far greater than the conflict they had imagined. The signal from the distant nebula still thrummed in the back of his mind. You stand at the crossroads of a galaxy lost to time. The words echoed in his mind. The mystery behind the Sentinels, the power they had unleashed, and the enigmatic figure that had warned them. It was all connected. One long-forgotten tale of an ancient power, now reawakened by their very actions. Soren's fingers tightened around the control panel as he adjusted the trajectory. The ship cut through the nebula's dense clouds with silent precision. The stars were obscured by swirling gases, and the pulse from the enigmatic ship's beacon grew stronger as they neared its core. Whatever lay at the center was no longer just a mystery. It was a challenge, one that would demand everything the crew had. We're close, Mira said, her voice strained with concentration. Her eyes flicked over the readings on the laser plasma display. The energy signatures. They're off the charts. This is no ordinary ship. It's not just technology. It feels alive. Soren shot a glance at the display. The ship was emitting fluctuating, powerful energy waves. The patterns didn't match anything they had encountered. Whatever it is, we're about to find out. Prepare the team. Are we really doing this? Elias's voice was quieter, a note of disbelief threaded through it. Going into a ship we know nothing about? We don't have a choice, Soren said, meeting his gaze. We either stop what's coming or let it destroy us all. The bridge fell silent, save for the rapid clicking of fingers over controls. Each crew member understood the stakes now, understood the risk they were taking. Every decision had led them here, to this moment. Captain, Dr. Lysa Vren spoke from behind them, her voice steady but carrying an edge of concern. The ship's readings are shifting. I believe it's trying to communicate with us. We need to be ready for anything. Understood, Soren replied, his eyes fixed on the massive, dark structure ahead of them. But we'll do it on our terms. With a sharp command, Soren ordered the ship to dock with the ancient vessel. The stellar resolve eased forward, guided by unseen forces, locking into place within the cold structure of the long-abandoned vessel. The crew's pulse quickened, every member bracing for what would come next. Docking complete, Mira's voice came, low but tense. We're locked into their systems. They're allowing it. Soren turned to the crew, his expression hardening. Prepare for a boarding operation. We need to know what we're dealing with before we make any more moves. Stay sharp, stay focused. The airlock cycled open with a hiss, the bridge crew donning their gear in swift, practiced movements. Soren led the way, his steps steady as he made his way toward the ship's inner core, flanked by his crew. Dr. Vren, Elias, and Mira followed close behind, their faces set in grim determination. The halls inside the ancient ship were massive, vast corridors that seemed to stretch endlessly into the shadows. The architecture was unlike anything Soren had ever seen. Massive, curving walls with engravings that twisted in patterns too intricate to fully comprehend. Energy pulses flowed through the walls, lighting their path in bursts of bright, unsettling color. The ship was alive, its pulse beating in synchrony with theirs. Soren felt a strange sensation, a quiet pressure in his chest as they ventured deeper into the ship's heart. It wasn't fear. It was recognition. This place had been waiting, calling to them for far longer than any of them could have known. As they moved through the corridor, the walls seemed to close in. The air felt thick, and the further they went, the heavier it became. The ship was aware of them just as they were aware of it. I don't like this, Elias muttered, scanning the environment with sharp eyes. It's too quiet. No signs of life, but we're still getting energy spikes. The group stopped at a large chamber, its door sealed tight with strange energy, humming with a low frequency that sent a vibration through the floor beneath their boots. Soren stepped forward, his hand resting on the ship's controls as the door slowly began to open. Inside, they were greeted by the most unexpected of sights, a colossal, crystalline structure at the center, pulsing with energy. It was as if the ship itself had been built around this core, an ancient heart that seemed to feed the vessel's power. This is it, Dr. Vren whispered. This is what they've been hiding, the core of the ship. Soren felt it then, a surge, a force, as if the ship had acknowledged them. The energy from the core intensified, and the very air around them shimmered with unspoken power. It's alive, Mira murmured. But it's not. It's not like anything we've seen before. A voice filled the room, deeper than sound, reverberating through their bones. You have awakened the end, the voice said. The cycle is incomplete, and now you will finish what you have begun. The voice came not through speakers, but through their minds, an overwhelming presence that seemed to bypass the need for language. Soren's pulse raced as the room pulsed with energy. "Finish?" Soren asked, his voice steady despite the rising tension. "What are you talking about? What is this cycle?" The response was a vibration, a flicker of the crystal's energy. The voice spoke again. "The cycle of the architects. You are the inheritors. The galaxy was never meant to exist forever. You were chosen to guide its destruction and rebirth, but you have disrupted that order." Soren's heart skipped a beat. He had known it. This ship, the Sentinels, they weren't the only players in this ancient game. There was something much older, more powerful, and far more dangerous behind it all. "We didn't come here to destroy," Soren said, his voice hardening. "We came to save what we could. If this galaxy is to end, it will not be because of our actions." There was a pause, a sudden calm that chilled the room. The energy in the core dimmed, and for a moment, Soren thought they had failed. Then the voice responded, softer now, with a hint of something ancient, almost mournful. "Then you must choose, Captain. Will you allow this galaxy to burn, or will you find the key to its rebirth?" The crystal flashed again, and the entire room seemed to shimmer with power. Soren stood still, his mind racing. There were no easy answers here, only a decision that would shape the future of everything they knew. "We will save it," Soren said, his voice cutting through the stillness. The crystal pulsed once more, this time brighter, and for the first time Soren felt something shift within the ship. A new energy, a different purpose. The crystal cracked, its power surging outward in a brilliant explosion of light. The stellar resolve shuddered, the ship vibrating as if the entire vessel were reborn. The walls, once cold and unyielding, seemed to breathe with life. Soren's gaze flicked over his crew. They were ready. They had done it. The ship's core had given them a choice to rebuild, to stand firm against the tide of destruction. "We've won," Soren whispered, his eyes fixed on the shattered crystal. Behind him, the crew stood together, their faces set in determined resolve. They had answered the call. And in the end, it wasn't just about surviving. It was about reclaiming the galaxy, shaping its future. And for the first time in their lives, they had no doubt. Whatever came next, they would face it as one. The stellar resolve drifted into the unknown, a beacon of hope in a galaxy once forgotten, now reborn. And as the stars stretched out before them, Soren knew one thing for certain. They had redefined what it meant to be human. In the end, they hadn't just answered a call, they had rewritten the future.